Hello everyone. Welcome back to Sunday. Just like to start out by anyone who's new. We use headphones when we listen to the soundtracks because many of the frequencies are too low to play on your cell phone or your laptop. In addition, it's the primary method for which we are causing a synchronicity of the hemispheres, brainwave entrainment, and the idea of entraining everybody's brainwaves in synchronicity with each other for a global mind link. We're trying to put everybody's consciousness into exactly the same scientifically aligned space so that we can amplify the power of our consciousness scientifically to tip the scales at a quantum level to change reality itself. No, nothing small here. In addition, at the end of today, we will have a soundtrack that we all listen to accomplish this. And this is the address where you can go to get this download for free, this soundtrack that we're going to listen to today. scientificsounds.com/self-talk. That's where you go today to get that. In addition, there's a discount for the soundtrack itself on my web store with a discount for anybody that's involved with this if you want to get the whole album. But be aware that that for many of these albums I've modified the soundtrack in a lot of different ways. Some places I've extended it, I've slowed it down, I've built all kinds of new things into it, I've added new different types of brainwave entrainment frequencies, and it's no exception for today. This soundtrack will be unique and separate and different, and when you download it, no one else in the world will have it except for you, because these soundtracks only last for 1 week. So make sure you download it within this week. Then it's replaced with the next one. This address here is for anyone who's new. This is where you go to see all of the live streams that I've done all the way back to April 5th. And I encourage you to start to move through those, to watch those, and watch them in order because each one builds on the one previous to that. I'll constantly be making references back to things that we've covered before. So I don't want you to get too far left behind with the kind of information that we've covered up to this point. That being said, today we're talking about the concept of deeper levels of communication and communication with ourselves. Ultimately, from what I've covered before with the Upanishads and the ancient texts from China, from I-Ching, from the Vedas, self is everywhere. An old Arabian proverb says, you cannot look away from the face of God because all there is God. So the idea of the shards that I had talked about, where infinite Godhood divided into an infinite number of finite pieces, and each piece solidified into something with a personality, this one shard of the personality of the total. And then each of those shards was caused to forget who they are and enter upon the hero's journey to find out your true nature. I want to apologize for last time where I forgot to push the button so that you could see the screens that I was talking about. So I'm going to cover those that you didn't get to see the last time. So that's where we're going to go right now. Briefly, we discussed the most ancient text on earth, which is the I-Ching, almost 5,000 years old. And the Vedas are 3,700 to 4,000 years old. So the Chinese had it by 1,000 years. That's a lot. And don't forget, that's only the point when the King Wen dynasty first put the concepts of the I Ching symbols into written form. And then I recommended the Wilhelm Baines edition of the I-Ching as the ultimate text, with the introduction by Carl Jung and commentaries by Confucius. I covered how you can use this as an oracle with the stocks and with coins. We covered the basic concepts of the great void going into the two parts of the yin and yang, which divide into symbols. The yang male is a solid line, a broken line for female. They break out into what's called 4 digrams. Those break out into 8 trigrams, and trigrams stacked on top of each other form hexagrams, 64 hexagrams. And this idea of the 8 trigrams, great 8 forces of nature, arranged in this circular diagram of the directions called the Bagua, the great Bagua. And then we related that to DNA and the pyrimidines and the purines being counterpoints to everything in the I Ching, where the 4 diagrams form the 4 bases of what's later the codons in RNA, forming the 64 codons that make up DNA strand, 64 hexagrams, which means each one of these hexagrams is a formula for base pairs combining together to form various things that the DNA is an instruction manual to manufacture, proteins. Here we're showing that the binary code of the solid and the broken line, where the 4 digrams form this code, this binary code, which aligns directly with the 4 bases that form the codons in DNA, and where these 4 diagrams and the 4 bases and the binary code form how these structures are formed together in DNA that create what's called the 64 amino acids. It's the formula for how to make amino acids, and amino acids is what combine together to make proteins, and the proteins is what your body is made of. This was a chart that you didn't see, and this is the work of someone called D. Harvey. You might look him up. He equates, since there are 8 trigrams, that forms 1 octave, from C to C, an octave higher. 7 notes in the musical scale, beginning the next octave. And if you remember when I talked about G.I. Gurdjieff and his idea of the law of 7, the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, that is the whole category of an octave, is C to C, C to a higher octave. So from what he says, each trigram represents 2 simultaneous notes an octave apart, C and C, D and D, and each of these notes applied to one of these trigrams forms tones for each of the hexagrams, double tones for each of the hexagrams. So here's another, when I was discussing, you didn't get to see the picture when I was discussing the nuclear trigrams, the nuclear hexagrams. And so I drew this up for today. Here's a hexagram, which is made of 2 trigrams. This upper trigram with the solid and 2 broken, and the lower trigram with 2 solid and 1 broken. These 2 trigrams form the hexagram. The classic definition of a nuclear hexagram is this one, which is covered in the text of the I-Ching, covered in the Wilhelm Baines edition. And if you go online and look up nuclear hexagrams, you'll see that this is what they talk about, that this line and this one form 1 trigram, and then this one and this one and this one form the lower trigram, and these stacked together form this hexagram. So there's a hexagram hidden inside of every hexagram. But my work 50 years ago when I was still in art school, this was my senior project, where there are hidden underneath, there are subnuclear hexagrams as well. And so how you get those is this one comes from the top three and then the next three. That forms this one. This one is formed from these bottom three and the next three up. That's this one. And then this one, these three here, and this one and this one and this one form the next. This one and this one and this one, and the next one here and here and here, that forms the next. So there's 5 hexagrams that make up the inner hidden structure of each hexagram. And interestingly, when I went through all 64 hexagrams and worked out the 5 hexagrams for each one, and I looked at them all, they all of the inner hexagrams that form every hexagram of all 64 only comprise 16 hexagrams. There is a core of 16 hexagrams which always compose the nuclear hexagrams. So those 16 are very important. Those 16 hexagrams, when you lay them out in a circle, forms a more complete picture of the compass. North, south, east, west, northeast, southeast, north, northeast, east, northeast, south, southeast, and it's the 16 compass directions, and each one is associated with a season and a month of the year. It's the great forces of nature which form the inner. So why that's important is still part of our research project, where if the hexagrams are forming these codons for manufacturing proteins, that means that there are 64 basic proteins that the system is making that builds the body, and 16 of those 64 have special importance. And currently I'm working on what are those 16 proteins and why are they important. That's one of our continuing research projects at CNR. Here I've taken this basic 5 nuclear and subnuclear hexagrams, and I've applied the notes to each of the trigrams that is denoted from his theory. And we're still checking this theory out. I'm going to be putting this to the test to see if this actually holds water, or if there's another solution that's a more core solution to which note goes with each one. But right now, according to his theory, these are the notes that go with each of the trigrams for this hexagram. So this hexagram has 2 trigrams. This one is the note D, this one is F, and these nuclear trigrams each have their note. So if I was going to create the sound rendition of this particular hexagram, number 18, there would be a D and a second D, which is an octave higher. Same thing here, F and F higher, as the ones that are the most loud. This would be the next most loud, G and G an octave higher, B and B an octave higher, and then all of these would be the ones in the background at 1 step less volume. I'm working this up now. I'll bring this to the clinic. I'll hook people up, see what happens when I expose them to this. What I really need is a molecular biologist to start working with. And I know a couple. There is a Dr. Wong that I deal with in San Diego that I've been working with for years. We're the ones who are doing work together with stem cells, injecting stem cells is not good enough. Once you've injected stem cells into an area, the stem cells just sit there. They don't really do anything. They have to be activated. And so that's the big thing in stem cell research is how do you activate the stem cells so that they begin to do something and transform the tissue. And we've worked out a system where we resonate the stem cells with your fundamental frequency that we find with my biotuning system. So we'll hook the patient up to the heart rate variability. We'll do the sound sweep. We'll find the homeostasis point. That frequency we will use to resonate the stem cells with, and that wakes them up. So we've been doing this now for 10 to 15 years with patients with stem cell activation. So it's something similar to that, where I can have access to scientists in a lab and microscopes and a bunch of other things to observe what happens when we use frequencies for the hexagram whose counterpart is one of the 64 codons of DNA, to see if we can activate different codons of DNA with this frequency chord. So basically, this is that central hexagram here, and these basic hexagrams here, and what their notes would be. Now, I've mentioned a few times this idea of neuro-linguistic programming. And for those of you who are not familiar with NLP, it was developed by two men, John Grinder and Richard Bandler. And it was Richard Bandler that I had interactions with over the years. And that was through my early days when I was first in California and set up a company called Brain Mind Research with two other fellows. And they were both associated with the John David Institute, which you may never have heard of. But John David was also a sound pioneer who had the most successful sound healing practice that has ever happened in the world. And he was right here in Carlsbad, where I am. He made all kinds of national news. He had a 8-page spread in Time magazine at one point. He had a huge, giant center, 14,000 square foot place in Carlsbad. And he was doing entrainment and primordial sounds and a bunch of other kind of things. His head sound engineer, a guy named Rich Stamper, and the head of logistics for his whole organization, Ed Smith, we all became business partners, and particularly around the space sounds, because Rich Stamper was a former Special Forces, so he had 5-star security clearance. So when we went to TRW to get the space sounds, to go through those space sounds and choose which ones that we could pull out, he was the one who was able to go past that 5-star security clearance to really go in there and choose what was going to come out. So we were 100% responsible for the space sounds being released to the public. And it was Rich Stamper's wife, who is a psychologist, who is friends with Richard Bandler. And through that connection, I met Richard Bandler. We spent, and I'd go with Richard, and we'd hang out for most of the day with him. And that was just a crazy, fascinating experience to be with this guy. He's kind of a genius madman, but the whole process of NLP involved communicating all the different types of ways that the system communicates with other people. Normally, when I'm talking with you, there's the impact of my voice. I'm shooting sound waves out in packets of shaped packets of my voice, and those packets are going into your ears, and language is crunching away, and those sound packets have meaning, and that's language, and we communicate. But underlying that are layers and layers of communication that we're not necessarily consciously aware of. Some we are. My tone of voice, my inflection of my voice, my facial expressions, what I do with my body, how I move my hands. I can communicate all kinds of things by a myriad of subconscious tells. And now there's a whole profession of that in the FBI and the CIA, of showing slowed down movies of people's faces as they speak, and how they blink and how they look and what happens with their eyes and grimaces they make, are ways of evaluating other layers of communication straight from the unconscious mind, which may be directly conflicting with the words that are being said. I may be saying, "Trust me," when all my facial tells are telling that I'm saying a lie. Things like that. Well, NLP based its entire system on these subconscious levels of communication. And I saw many examples of what I saw Richard Bandler do that just kind of blew my mind. This idea that your words is one thing, the way that you word language, which words you choose in your sentences is all important, including the concept of Freudian slips, where you use the wrong word, which sends a subconscious tell of what you're really trying to say. The way you use your body and your senses. For instance, according to Neuro-linguistic programming, there are 3 different types of sensory acquisition: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, which divides people into 3 primary types of acquisition personalities: visual type people, auditory type people, kinesthetic type people. Here in California, we have a lot of kinesthetic types. They're the ones who are out early in the morning running on the beach, doing all kinds of physical exercises, yoga. People who are visual types tend to be dominant in our society because we're a visual dominant society. Television, movies, cell phones, computers, we're overloaded in our visual. The auditory type people, like musicians, audio engineers, things like that, and tend to be the class that is most disadvantaged in the 21st century. I started out as an artist. Actually, I started out as a musician, but I doodled all the time. And I went to art school. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, so I learned the visual arts in great depth and detail. I was a filmmaker for years, but I made my own soundtracks. So I was a visual artist and a musician at the same time, so I kind of was a combination of visual auditory. Then I went years later to chiropractic school and became a doctor and learned all the medical level of information about anatomy and physiology and biochemistry and physics and all that kind of stuff. So really, I sort of have a diploma for my right brain and one for my left brain. I have a chiropractic degree, and I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, and I've got 90-hour-long soundtracks sold everywhere all over the world. So, and the idea of using these headphones all the time and exposing myself to tens of thousands of hours of composing and soundtracks and creating in the acoustic realm with brain entrainment and synchronicity of the hemispheres. And so I've been synchronizing my hemispheres and training my brain waves for 40 years, and it's had its effect on me. But in one case, for instance, I'm sitting here at my computer and I use my left hand for my mouse, but I'm right-handed. But as time has gone on, I'm now ambidextrous. I pick things up with my feet. I can almost write my name with my foot. It's a strange and interesting phenomenon to observe in myself as my brain becomes more homogeneous and more synchronized. My ability to bring the scientific realm and the artistic realm together has really melded through the work that I do. When we go back, so also the way that you organize your thoughts and actions, what kind of body language tells a lot of things. There's a whole science of all of these things coming together in NLP that's pretty astounding. For instance, when you're talking to someone, just observing what they do with their eyes and where they move their eyes while they're talking gives you unconscious tells about where that information is coming from. So for instance, if they move their eyes over this way, the memory is being accessed from their auditory center or their visual center or their kinesthetic center. And so if you're talking to somebody and every time their eyes move this way, it's always up and to the right and never down here, this is a visual type person. Most of their input into their brain comes from their visual center. So that means that if you wanted to communicate with them and create an empathic bond, let's say that you're a therapist and you really want to connect with this person, you watch the tells, you see that their eye is always moving up and to the right, you know they're a visual type person, so you begin to structure your sentences to always include visual references. I see what you're talking about. But if the eyes were to move directly to the right, then I might change my wording to say, I hear you, or I grasp that, I can grasp that, which is a kinesthetic reference. Even though it doesn't seem like much, it causes a unconscious communication bond with this person who unconsciously, without their knowledge, is acknowledging, oh, this person's like me. So I saw, Rich Bandler do, for instance, if you look him up on television for his snake phobia, he did a snake phobia thing in 2 minutes flat on television on a talk show with the talk show host who is deathly afraid of snakes. And in just a couple of minutes, all he was doing was it looked like he was just talking to him. And in 2 to 3 minutes, this guy was over there touching a snake and holding the snake, a big one, a great big boa constrictor, with no fear. And so part of that was a concept in NLP called reframing, where you change how you look at something and your emotional reactions to that shift and change. And this is a big technique, this reframing technique. For instance, there was a woman who was obsessive compulsive disorder, where she would clean obsessively the house, and anytime anybody walked through on the carpet, they would change the shag design of the carpet with footprints, and she would come after them and vacuum them up so that the carpet was always smooth with no sign of anybody had traversed the carpet. And so he did this thing with her where he asked her, what would be one of the greater tragedies that you can imagine that would happen to you, that would break your heart? And she's thinking about it. He's saying, well, what about your family? What if your family was in a big car accident, everybody died except for you? What would the result of that be? You wouldn't have to sweep your carpet anymore. There would be no footprints to remove because nobody would be there. And that reframing changed everything. That one example that all of a sudden she reframed the footprints on the carpet to be something sought after and something good and something that she rejoiced in, instead of something that, oh, you're messing up my perfect carpet. Those kind of ideas. He did a technique that I saw. So he would do a technique of hypnotizing you in such a way that you had no idea you were hypnotized. And one of those was called mirroring. And mirroring has to do with a quirk of how the nervous system is set up, how the brain works. And I use that therapeutically, and particularly with autism. So one of the hallmarks of autism is socialization skills are missing. And depending on where you are on the spectrum, if you're way up towards the top of the spectrum, it's severe. These children will not look at you. They won't look you in the eyes. They'll look through you. They'll look around you. It's almost as if you were no more important than the light switch on the wall. And this is a property of a specific type of brain activity called mu wave activity, MU. And here's how it works. When I'm here talking to you and I'm making a face and my mouth is moving and I'm waving my hands around, and my tone of voice and all of that is communicated to you. Your brain is receiving that information. Every time my hand moves, in order to make my hand move, there's a center in my left motor cortex. The thought arrives that I want my hand to move, and I want it to move this way. So it arises in a section of the brain that communicates to the motor cortex on the left side. And the motor cortex sends the signals down to the muscles in my arm, and it makes them move. And when you see that happen, the sensory cortex on the other side receives the visual information of my hand moving and lights up the areas in my brain that control the muscles for my hand. And it makes them light up mirroring what I'm seeing. In order for me to understand what I'm seeing, my brain lights it up in my own cortex as if my hand is moving, but it doesn't transfer it over to the motor cortex to actually make my hand move. But it's lighting up in my brain. So we can hook you up to an EEG machine, and I can hook the other person up to an EEG, and when I'm making my hands move, we can watch this motor cortex firing around with those motions, and we can watch your cortex mirroring that in your brain. It's called the mirror neurons, the mirror neurons, and this is severely lacking or missing in autism spectrum disorder. And we use brain entrainment to entrain the mu function back, and it works spectacularly well. It's a functional problem. It's not broken brain. It's a deficiency in brain development for a number of different reasons, which perhaps I will discuss at one point when we discuss a series of different conditions and how we work with those with sound. So I saw Rich Bandler do this technique where he mirrored this guy. So this particular guy was a motor mouth guy, a fast talker guy. So, and he was a visual type. So Bandler started couching his words in "I see what you're saying" and kind of a thing. And he began to mirror his body language. So every time this guy would cross his arms, Bandler would suddenly start to cross his arms. And every time that guy would lean his head to the left, then Bandler would lean his head to the left. And he started to speed his speech pattern up to match this guy's rapid speech pattern until they're both speaking at the same speed. And then Bandler begins to speak faster to exaggerate what the other guy was exhibiting. He exaggerated the speed and made it faster. What he's watching for is this guy's speed to come and match his. And then he speeds a little more and he matches his, and he slows it down and he matches his. Once he's got this guy following him, he's hypnotized. That is the very definition of hypnosis. You follow what I tell you to do. And it's not just words. but it's a myriad of all kinds of forms of communications of how I can tell you what to do. By my body mirroring, my tone of voice matches yours, my speed of speech matches yours, my facial expressions match yours, and pretty soon you're following me. And as soon as you follow me, I can slow my speech and slow my speech and slow my speech, and you keep going and going, and pretty soon your eyes are starting to flutter, and the next thing you know, you're out. And it all happened within 2 minutes. So now he deepens and deepens and deepens, brings this person back to their primary trauma that's causing their phobia or causing whatever it is that's going on with them psychologically, and has them replay that movie. And while they're replaying that movie, he wants them to play the movie backwards. He wants people to run backwards, talk backwards, broken things to fly back up and reassemble themselves. And then he wants them to do it faster and faster and faster. Replay the movie backwards, faster and faster and faster. And something about doing that, something about reversing the movie of the trauma, disconnected the emotional portion of that trauma from the memory itself. And now we've got two things. And now we can process the emotion out without re-traumatizing yourself with the memory of what caused the trauma. We can eradicate the trauma as a separate entity, and then we can eradicate the charge to the memory, and then that whole phobia is gone. And I saw this whole process happen in 5 minutes. It just kind of like never seen anything like this before. And I went away from that thinking to myself, how can I use this in my own practice with my own patients? How could I do this? And I realized that I already was doing work with people re-scripting the unconscious mind, because if I'm using brain entrainment to entrain you to these deep places where the subconscious is open for programming, particularly with biotuning, so now I can find a place where the autonomic nervous system is in its zero stress zone, its safe zone. That's where all the doors open up to my program mode of the CPU of my biocomputer. You are available now for reprogramming. So I'd better choose my words carefully according to NLP, or I might communicate the opposite message that I would like to communicate to your unconscious mind to re-script what's going on there. But one thing that I was working with patients is, after a patient has a series of breakthroughs where I'll have physical releases and emotional releases and self-defeating belief system releases. When we get to the point of the self-defeating belief systems, then there are a series of clearly defined archetypal kind of self-defeating belief systems that we all share. Number one, no matter how hard I work at it, I'll never make it. No matter how many relationships I have, I'll never find the person for me. No matter how many doctors I see or how much money I'll spend, I'll never get well. And so we're working to re-script that concept at a deep unconscious level. And I'm coming back with this information from Bandler. And where that came to me was this new technique that I developed called reversed memory technique, reversed speech technique. So this was Bandler's technique, reverse memory technique, and I took this into a reverse speech technique. So the concept was, I take a recording of someone speaking this self-defeating belief system, like no matter how much money I spend, I'll never get well. And then reversing that, so it's saying it backwards. And that combined with previous information that I was very familiar with from a psychiatrist in New York who wrote a couple of books, one called Your Body Doesn't Lie. And his whole thing was using muscle testing, and I haven't talked about muscle testing yet. Kinesiology, applied kinesiology, and how that works. It's basically monitoring stress levels in your body, and if you can successfully stress the body out, you will have a readout through muscle strength throughout your body, because at the moment you have a stress response, all your muscles lose their strength, or they lose an ability to be really strong, because energy is being diverted into fighting for your life in a different way. And one of the things that he saw was the catastrophic effects of listening to a healthy heartbeat recording played backwards. It caused something deep in the brain called neurological switching, where the right-left hemispheres switch their activities to the opposite side and read things inside out and backwards. It's devastating. And I was recognizing that in this reverse speech thing that I was starting to play around with. That if I could take your voice and play it backwards, would it erase that concept from your unconscious mind the same way that I was seeing Richard Bandler doing it with a memory? And so I'm going to show you right now something here. I'm going to go to my main screen, and I'm going to pop up one of my recording programs. This is one of my recording studio programs, and I have preloaded in here this statement, which I'll play for you here. I'll never get well. No matter how many doctors I see, I'll never get well. No matter how many doctors I see, I'll never get well. So that's pretty heavy duty. So and you can also see that these are sound packets in a certain shape, right? There's a shape to this that impacts your body. When you resonate your body in this packet shape, communicates directly to the unconscious mind. If I go up here, and you see right here it says reverse. If I click that, and now I play it. He says there's God in my heart, I'm on. I wake every night. He says there's God in my heart, I'm on. I wake every night. He says there's God in my heart, I'm on. So right now I'm erasing that concept from the unconscious mind for myself because it's my voice. It would be more profound if this recording was done with 3D microphones and I had headphones on when I was hearing it. Because now the subconscious mind would read this as more real, as more actual, truly me. If I go here again, and I set my settings at 200% minus 12 semitones, that means I'm slowing it down by half speed. And if I do it one more time, now we're starting to get somewhere. Because now your rational thinking mind can't recognize this as your voice anymore. And if I do something like add some effects to it, some reverb, let's add some reverb to this. So you can see where this is going quickly. I'm disguising it from the rational thinking mind, and I'm making it more powerful to the unconscious mind, can still recognize it with no problem, but my rational mind can't. So it means it's bypassing the filters of my rational mind and going straight into the unconscious. And so I'm just going to save this one as never get well. Backwards 1. And let's do it one more time. Let's do slow this down one more time. And let's save that one. 2. Backwards 2. And one more time. Backwards 3. And now I can take these because I've saved them. Let's see. I'm going to pull these up to and now I can go to my multi-track, and I'm going to start putting these into track 1, 2, and 3. So here's track 1, track 2, track 3. And when I slow it down, it gets longer. It gets twice the length, right? So I need to take this first one and double it up so it matches the second one. I needed to take the second one and double it up so it matches the third one. And now if I play these, now if I mix this down, I have it as a wave file, and I'm just going to fade this out over here. Fade out. And I'm going to add one more thing. So now let's hear what this is like. So now this is communicating to the deep unconscious mind. And if I go back, do one more thing here. Whoops. Wrong one. I'm going to add one more track here. A track that I recorded in 3D in Kauai, Hawaii. Let's see what that sounds like here. Turn the volume down on it. Anyway, you get the point. Now I can mix this down. And the Kauai thing lasted for a lot longer, so I have to kind of cut that off. And cut this off and fade it out. And now I have a track that lasts for almost 2 minutes. And I'm going to save that. And here's what it sounds like. We are erasing this concept from the unconscious mind. So welcome to my world. Because that's sort of what it's like. So I developed this into an entire technique that I worked with psychotherapists and hypnotherapists who were using my soundtracks in the background. And it's a technique that for the advanced biotuning practitioners that I train my biotuning techniques with, advanced ways of re-scripting the unconscious mind and changing phobias and changing addictions and changing self-defeating belief systems that have been with me most of my life. The core concept here that I'm trying to get to is the deepest possible level of self-communication and the concept of self-talk, which is what somebody like Louise Hay was really all about. That the voice that's always going in my head behind the scenes is my self-talk, and that self-talk is my collective unconscious mind communicating to me. It's my unconscious, and its unconscious is unruly and untamed, and that's what meditation practices have been about in all these different cultures throughout the world, is taming the unconscious and bringing it around. It's what we are attempting to do with these mind links, is we're trying to get in communication with the portion of us that has an idea, or at least to develop an idea, to come in contact with the core idea of a perfect life, of what it could be like, what this could all be like for all of us, and for my life in particular, and for all of our lives as a community on planet Earth. Core at the deepest level of that is the disconnect between our indigenous self, the deep ancient ancestor part of ourselves who has wisdom and answers and earth savvy and life savvy, the part of us that has been stripped away and unused through overuse of an artificial civilization superimposed on top of the living reality of our being as living life on Earth with other creatures all around us. The symbiotic relationship of us with our planet, with all other life forms, has been stripped away by civilization. And because of that, we are suffering as a species. And the form of that suffering is what we are right now experiencing as in the 21st century, which has led me to step forward with my little piece of the puzzle of what I believe can help to change that, as we all need to do. Everyone here has a piece of the puzzle. And in particular, the people who are here have a piece of the puzzle, or you would not be here, and you would not have been following this discussion for this long. It's calling something in each one of us, the part of us that knows. and the part of us that would love to try to be able to do something. And so this is a call to that action, to use science of my little piece of the puzzle to help us all get in touch with the part inside of us that knows what to do when the call to action to us comes, as it is coming right now at this time. Which brings me back to the indigenous self, and in this case, the ancient, most indigenous ancestor self of all. This picture on the right is one of the frozen prehistoric ancestors, and they reconstructed his face scientifically from the bones. This guy could be anybody on the street, really, but he's 150,000 years old. People don't change. We are the same. It's just that this level of ancestor looked upon the universe differently and had a different relationship to the universe than we do. There wasn't all of the scientific information about what the moon is or what the stars are or what the earth is and all of that. But if you can think of what it must have been like to be a prehistoric ancestor living in the magical environment of Earth and wonder what in the heck is that thing coming up in the morning, the sun. You don't have any astronomical data. You don't know what that is. You can feel the heat on your body. You know it's the life-giving influence, and then it goes down and the moon comes out and the stars come out. You don't know what those are either. It's magic. The whole thing is gods and great forces that are much bigger than us. The prehistoric landscapes, 150,000 years ago, that our ancestors were part of, the primordial young earth landscape, the kinds of influences that we had from this environment and our relationship to this environment, what it must have been like to be so close to nature without a lot of the complex artifacts of civilization that we now have stuck in our minds. It would be a much clearer, open, unconscious, conscious relationship with other living things. This is the place in myself that I want to grow. I want this part to awaken. I want to be more engaged with my world and with my inner world and with my outer world. So these ancient landscapes that our ancient ancestors populated is the part of the deep ancestral indigenous self that I'm talking about, with whole new other modes of communication where language itself wasn't even developed all that well. So that was the purpose of paintings. If I come back from a hunt and I want to tell everybody else what it was like, I have to draw a picture. I have to make a movie. I'm making a picture of what happened, of what we did. Chasing herds and communication with animals and meeting other people or whatever that are foreign and strange. So today we are exploring completely new realms that we haven't done before. If you remember way back when I discussed all the different brainwave frequencies that we deal with at CNR, and many of these we develop ourselves. The bridge states is all our work with lambda and hypergamma. Nobody else is doing that. Nobody's doing any work with gamma. A discovery of epsilon back in 1989, and then exploring below epsilon brain frequencies, and eventually the discovery in 2001 of the default mode network of extremely low frequencies. The lowest range of delta is 0.5 hertz. That's one brain pulse every 2 seconds. Well, epsilon is one brain pulse every 4 seconds, every 8 seconds, every 16 seconds, every 32 seconds, one brain pulse. And this is currently the experimental mode that we're in, exploring extremely slow brainwave frequencies, which I believe are the frequencies that communicate at an organic Earth level. We're getting down to brainwave frequencies that are approaching a synchronicity of the respiratory speed of trees and plants. We're aligning with natural forces that work at a completely different speed level than we do, but we can entrain our brainwaves there. So these are all the way down to one brain pulse every minute, every 2 minutes. And when I build these modulations into the soundtrack, something really extraordinary happens. The soundtrack explodes in 3D all around you and seems to have great depth into the distance. And that's what we'll experience today, because today this soundtrack is an ancient shamanic journey into our deep ancestral, prehistoric ancestral self, indigenous self. So I particularly want to imagine us traveling back in time to a prehistoric world before civilization, where we were immersed in this symbiotic relationship with one another in our tribe and with other life forms, all other life forms on a planet, with great respect and symbiotic relationship, and with the planet itself. So this is going to take place in a prehistoric canyon. Down in the bottom of this canyon there's a river, and there's all kinds of life forms there that we are in intimate contact with. And our journey is taking us in search of Mother Earth itself, the Mother Earth Spirit. We're going to commune with the Mother Earth Spirit, and we want to find an answer to how do we reconnect and change reality? How do we get this back that we've lost so profoundly? Our relationship to the deep core level of the collective unconscious with the Mother Earth Spirit. So this is a journey, and the brain entrainment frequency is iota 1. It's an experimental brain frequency of deeper and deeper levels of communication with the collective unconscious mind. That's where we're going today. So preparez-vous. Here's headphones. So you're in a prehistoric canyon, following the river, finding the magical entity of Gaia. Mother Nature herself is who we're trying to get to. So I'm just going to pop. This is where you can get the soundtrack. This is where you can see all of the previous live streams. Thank you all so much for continuing to be with us here. It's important. Please spread the word. Tell as many people as you can. Each one of us knows people like us who would be enthusiastic about this discussion and these experiences. Follow me on Facebook. Search Dr. Jeffrey Thompson. Same thing with YouTube, Dr. Jeffrey Thompson. Same thing with Instagram, at Dr. Jeffrey Thompson. So thank you all very much for being here this time. Peace and love and health and safety to all of you. Please take care, and I'll see you next Sunday.